Hello and welcome back to the channel. Let me make myself a little bit bigger here. There's a new video I am doing on Remix right here, and also Prisma, which is to the side over here. As they say, Prisma, the next generation Node.js and TypeScript object relational modeling tool or library. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to spin up a SQLite database using Prisma and basically just show how to interact with that database inside of Remix, just doing some basic CRUD actions. The bulk of my application will really just be a copy of this. As you can see here, we can loop through objects that we get back from the database that have been loaded through a loader, and then we can use actions to basically add additional objects. We'll do a couple of different things with our object relational model. Basically, our database entry will have kind of some relationships. You can see how they work also. But really, it's just a way to easily connect the database to the back of your Remix application when you're trying to familiarize yourself with the platform and do some things. So that's what we got for this video. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Please make sure you share with your friends and leave some suggestions on other content you'd like to see. All right, let's get to the code. Okay, for this video, as I said, we're going to need an application, and so here's a basic command to kind of spin up your initial Remix application. So let's get that created. And we're going to go with the Express server. We're going to use TypeScript and yes, run npm install. So that should get things started for us. And then once we get our project, see if we can get this thing open in Xcode. I mean, not Xcode, VS Code. Let's kind of drag this over here. Drop it on top of VS Code and see if it'll open it up for us. We will worry about upgrades later. We ran the install. Let's bring over our application. Let's move this terminal out of the way. And let's make this visible. Let's zoom this in a bit. All right. And let's, so we have our basics. Let's get this started. And to get this started, npm run dev. I don't think that's, sorry, npm, sorry, run start, my bad. Okay. So we have our Remix server, our Remix application running. We got our text editor open. Now let's get started with the database. Okay, so as you look at this create project setup, there's a couple of libraries that we need to install. And so that's kind of what I'm going to do. Also, I'll link this in the code below so you can see the commands that I've entered to get this started. I have also created a basic blog post that kind of has all the code and everything in it that I'll also provide access to. So let's create another terminal down here and start adding some things to it. All right, so we installed Prisma, TypeScript. Let's install the Prisma client. We installed the Prisma client, and then the last thing that we want to do is we want to add the specific data source provider. Well, we've already did that. Okay. And so we're going to do it with like this. It's npx prisma init data source provider SQLite. Okay. Now they kind of lay out some next steps here already. Kind of set your database URL in a .env file. And then this getting started, like, it's going to walk you through creating a model, which I'm going to do. And so let's see what it's created for us already. So here's our Prisma directory. Here's our Prisma schema. The database URL has been added to our .env, so it's just creating a SQLite database at this path. But what I need to do is kind of start to create the objects that are going to exist in our database that we want to work with, and so that's what we need to do here inside the schema file. And that's what they're talking about right here. Your database has no tables yet. Read getting started to talk about how to set up the schema. So I'm just going to cut and paste the code in so that we're not sitting here watching me type. And what I have are two models. So here's my first model. And my first model is a user. It has an ID that's going to auto increment. It has an email address and it has a username. The email address needs to be unique, which is why it's set there. And then also I'm creating a one-to-many relationships with this new object I'm going to create called Bookmark. So we're going to create that object below. So here's my bookmark. Let's save this. Here's my bookmark type or object. It has an ID, like the other one. It's got it created at time, which gets set to default. Now I have a note about the bookmark, which is just a text field called text, a string, and then I have a URL with the default value of blank. And then here's how we create the relationship. So I have this user ID, which is the ID of the user that's associated with it, and then here's this user object. And here's how you kind of create the relationship between the user ID here, which references in the user model the ID object. And so that's what we need to, so now we can have users, and the users have n number of bookmarks associated with them. All right, and so we've now created this object, and when we create the Prisma client, the client's going to allow us to use that client API to kind of interact with this data and make calls without basically writing SQLite queries. So the next thing that we need, now that we've done this, the next thing, so what happens is every time after you modify your schema, you need to do a migration. And the migration is what's going to apply the changes to the database and update the client. And you want to give it a name, and so the first one we're going to do, so let's come over here, close this again, and then paste this command in. And so we're going to call npx prisma migrate to my dev database, and I'm going to give a name of this migration, and this is just to initialize the database. And so that's going to run, it's going to do a bunch of stuff. And so it kind of lays out here and tells you what it's doing. So it created a database, it applied my migration. So migrations were applied to the database. Now my database is in sync with my schema. And then it ran the generator, and I guess the generator needed to create my client. And so now I have my client, which has also been added to my project, which will show how I'll be able to kind of access my data. So we covered a lot, but you can go back, do the video again, look at it, and also there'll be links, and then as I said, I'll provide all the source code for what I had to do. Also, we can take a look at what our database looks like right now using the Prisma Studio. If I copy, and let's come over here, can I open another window? What's in this window? That's the server running. Here's just, let's go in here. I can type npx Prisma Studio in my directory. And what it's going to do is it's going to spin up this studio in a separate browser. So let's move this browser over here. And so you can see it has all of my objects that I've created. So it's got bookmarks. There's no bookmarks right now. And I can go back, and then it has my users, and there's no users right now. But you can see how you can get the ID and so you can see how based on the users, it's got this bookmarks array, which is the relationship back to this bookmarks objects. So we'll take a look at this later after we get some data in, but now let's hop to remix to see how we're going to actually get this data. So we're going to start off in our routes. We're going to start off with our index route, and we're just going to clear everything out of here. All right, let's start off like that. And then the next thing we're going to, let's format this a bit. Then the next thing we're going to do is, as you know, we need our loaders because we want to load some data from our tables when we start up the application. And so what we're going to do here is, well, first let's create our loader. And if I come up to the top here and outside, because remember we want to do it outside of my original function, outside the render function, we have our loader. Need to import my Prisma client. So my Prisma client is loaded. And the cool thing is that you can see is I'm getting the type of my objects. So you can see here I have my user object, and then it has the functions that can be executed against my user object. So the client gives us all of that. The client gives us access to all that information, which makes it easy to interact with the data. And I think, let's see if I save this now. And let's take a look at my terminal. And let's see what happens when I refresh. Is anything? I saved. This stuff should all be gone. So I realized what was going wrong. I didn't follow the basic instructions of the README, which tells you that you need to basically first run npm run dev and then npm run start dev. So that seems to have been the problem. Let's just confirm that. Let me close my README. Go back to my index tsx. So if I run this now, I'm not getting anything in my console. Let's uncomment this. And now I'm getting the changes in my console. So that's what the problem was. All right, so let's get back to kind of what's going on. So the steps here to use the Prisma client are, as you can see, I've imported the client. I get an instance of the client, and then I execute this query find many on the user object. I get the users in my all users. I disconnect from my client, and then I return all users. So now here inside of index, I can const users, and then I can say use, I believe it's use loader data, and then use loader data should have my users in it. And then I can basically just loop through them. I put some code together already, so let me drop this code in here for kind of the style and everything I put together. So give me a second. Let's put the style in. And then we have put a little title in here. And let's get that going. And then underneath that, we actually want to, let's just show us looping through our data first. All right, so then underneath here, we can loop through our data. And so let's get these imports in. So I'm importing my user object from my Prisma client. Need to import my link from Remix. That's what we got there. Let's move this over. That. And right now you see I have no data. But if I go, let's go back to our Prisma Studio and let's go into our user and let's just add one. Add a record. Email is test@mail.com. Test user, and I'm going to save this change. All right, so now I have my one user, and now let's go back and let's reload. And you can see I have my, let's close my debugger. There we go. So you can see I have my test user showing up. All right. It's a little bit bigger than I wanted it to be, but let's cut this with 500. And that seems to make things fit a little bit better on my screen. All right, so now you saw how we have the user. So this shows how I loop through the user, but what we want to do is show how we can actually add a user. So to add a user, we want to create a form, and in the form on submit, we want to have an action that supports that. So let's just drop in a form. Okay, and we gotta do our imports. Let's import this form from Remix. And then we're also following, basically what I did was I based this code that you see here literally off the code that's on the front page. So I'm using this busy state and I'm using this transition. So let's just copy it from right here. I need all that. I just need the busy state and transition. Copy that. And let's put this up here at the top underneath the user loader data. And let's import our use transition. Okay, it's complaining because let's refresh this. All right, so see we have our form up here. I'm not really big on styling. I just wanted to get the data in there to show how it's going to work. All right, so I need an action to respond to when I click the submit button here. So let's go up to the top, and this is our loader. Get data when page is loaded, and then let's put our action in what will be called when I do a submit on my page. So let's get that code here. Called when I submit the form on my page. Okay. So to create a user, I need an email and a username. Those are the only two fields I need. Everything else will be automatically created. From my request, I get my form data, which will give me the fields from the form, from my form, and then for my form, I use a key, which is the name. So let's go back down here. See name and username. I pass those into Prisma to user create. Once again, we get the types, which helps us show how we need to set up this object. And then I don't need this. This is basically just a response from the Prisma call. Then I disconnect the client, and then I return true. The important thing, and what you're going to notice, it's pretty awesome, is that I don't need to make any changes inside of my code here to get it to reload and update the list, which I think is extremely awesome. So let's just try and add another one. So test2@mail.com, test2 user. So you see it added the user. It automatically made the call to the backend to update my user interface, and so my new user got added, which is pretty awesome. And if we now go back to Prisma Studio, and let's do a refresh on here, we can see we have our two users. Okay, it didn't save my username for my first user. Actually, I can see it's missing there, so let's just kind of put that in here. This username is test. Save change. Okay. Okay, so my users are all straight. Now the other thing we want to do is I want to be able to add bookmarks to a specific user. And so to do that, I'm going to create another route that we access when I click on View Details. And I think I already have it basically here. So yeah, there's going to be another route that's based on the user ID that I pass. And so to do that, we need to go over here inside of our routes. And first, let's create a folder called Bookmarks. And then inside that folder, we actually create a file called id.tsx. I believe that's how you name it. Yeah, bookmarks. Let's put that. Where is it? Come on. So $id.tsx. And so what's going to happen is this is going to pass me in the ID as a parameter so I can get access to the user. So if you look here, I'm calling bookmarks and then I'm passing a user ID. This value here will end up getting passed in as ID to this new component that we're about to create. So let's go inside here, and for my bookmarks TSX ID, we have some basic imports that we need. We can get this out of the way. The first thing is we need our component, and this is our component. We're going to load some data in. We're going to need to get the bookmarks associated with the user, and then we want the user object also, so we can provide a little header information about the specific user. So that's how we're going to do that. Let's start our return. And let's put this here, save, format this. Let's start, well, this is going to be plain, so I don't have my use loaded data, don't have my loader function, so let's put my loader function. Let's talk about my loader function now. So let's go up to the top and put that in. So in my loader function, I need to do two things. Get the user, and then get users bookmarks. Okay, and once again, we're just going to use the Prisma client. This is pretty awesome, and so let's instantiate our client up at the top here, and then let's go down here, and then we're going to get a user. Okay, and we want to say Prisma, give us a user, find a unique one where the ID matches the ID parameter that we're going to get passed in. We want to convert it back to an int and then pass it in to this where clause. And so that should get us the user. And then we're going to do something similar for getting the user's bookmarks. So this will get the user's bookmarks. So it's basically find many where the user ID equals the ID that's passed in. So basically find however many bookmarks you can find where the user ID matches that. You also have the ability to kind of get back the whole user object that's associated with the bookmark, but we're not going to do that here, but I just left the code here so you can see how it's done. And then this will kind of dump out the information in the console. So let's see if we can get this to work. We should only get users back, so there's no bookmarks associated with users yet. And we should get something dumped out in our console down here. Well, first let's check to see if our routing worked. Let me move myself out of the way so we can actually see. And let's try view details. Okay, you did find a loader for a route ID, but didn't return it. All right, I gotta return stuff from my loader. So let's return the data that we're getting. So once again, we want to close up our client, and then we're going to return our bookmarks, and then we're going to return the user. All right. So you can see it's got the username. So if I go back home, username. So let's test the next one, view details, manage bookmarks for test user 2. So my user objects are loading. And also if we look down here in the log, we can see that I'm getting back my user and that I'm not getting any bookmarks back yet. So now let's go in and we need to add our for loop, our usual loop to show the bookmarks that get returned. So we'll do the loop first, and then we'll do the form to add them later. So here's our bookmarks code. Manage bookmarks. And so we can see some bookmarks. We're going to go back to our trusty Prisma Studio and see if we can add a bookmark here. So let's go, this is user ID 1. Let's see if it'll let us add a bookmark. I haven't done this before, so this is live. Add a record. Required field must not be, all right. User ID is 1. Text. Added from Prisma Studio. And then this is supposedly just some URL, www. Future is written in future is written in code. That's a website that I have with all my videos. Okay, let's see if we can save this. So it saved it, but let's see, did it add our relationship properly? Users, and it did. So you can see now this test user has 1 bookmark associated with it. And so now let's see if our query is loading that correctly. So let's go back home and then load test user. And you can see it's loaded the bookmark that I've added. Now let's create the form to actually load the bookmark. So there's a couple, I'll come back and explain kind of what I'm doing here later on how I'm managing the delete. I just want to show you how to add the form to add bookmarks inside the application. So let's get the code to do that. Very similar to the code that we use to add the user. So here we have a description and a URL. Once again, no comments on my styling. And so what's going to happen is one interesting thing I'm doing different here is I'm passing in the ID of the specific user, which we got as a parameter when we went to the bookmarks page. And the reason why I'm doing that is when I create the bookmark, I need to tell the bookmark what user it's associated with, so it needs the ID as a parameter. And I'm passing it as a hidden parameter because I'm defining it ahead of time. But then I'm also using the URL and the text. The text is the basically description, and the URL is the URL is the actual URL. And then what we're going to do is we have our loader function. We need to have an actions function now. So let's drop that code in and kind of walk through what's happening in there. So the same approach, we have our client, and then we want to disconnect at the end, and we want to do some stuff in the middle. So for this, we definitely want to just create a bookmark. So let's just say, create a bookmark. Okay. So we're going to bring this back up to the top. Okay, so once again, we're using a client, so we get our bookmark object. We're going to call create on it. We're going to pass in the fields that it needs. It needs the text field for text and a URL field. And then here we're going to create the user object that is a section. I create user object. We're going to associate a specific user to this bookmark, and we're going to take the ID that got passed in as a hidden parameter here, and we're going to use that to connect this to that user. And then we should get our bookmark created. Let's format this and give it a rip. So this is added in app. Let me move that. It's ibm.com. Doesn't really matter. And now let's create a new bookmark. Okay, you define the action for root, but did not return. I always get burned on that. I gotta return something. Let's just return true for now. So bookmark create, return true. What you would normally do is if some error is generated or something, you can return an error from here, and then you could get action data, and based on the action data, take a specific action. All right, so see, it added it. You can see it added it here, but it threw the error. So let's add another one. So add with no error. What? Yeah, it didn't return anything. Where did I? XID, action, wait. Oh, I didn't save it. Okay, one more time. Okay, one more time. There you go. So it added it successfully, and it updated the page. Now the next thing we're going to do is we want to actually delete this. And you might think, well, I'm already doing something with my action. I'm already handling it on a create new object. How am I going to handle my delete submit also? And what we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the type of the method that's getting passed in on the action. So when I create a bookmark initially, the request method is a post. So I can just do this, so if request method is post, then create a bookmark. If request dot method equals delete, then I want to delete a bookmark, right? And it's pretty straightforward how to delete a bookmark. So if methods delete, then bookmark delete, and just say the object that I want deleted, and I use the same ID. This will be the ID that gets actually. You want to know what? I should probably change this so that's more intuitive, because you might get confused with the two IDs. So what I've done is inside of this form where I'm looping through and rendering the bookmarks, I've created another form object. I set the method to delete, and I have my submit button in here. And then I pass in the ID of the bookmark I want to delete. But I'm going to change this so it's clearer. I'm going to change this to bookmark ID. This way it's clearer in the code. And so then inside of here, I'm looking for the bookmark ID off the form, and I'm going to use that ID to know which one to delete. So now let's see if it actually is going to delete my ID. So let's delete this last one more time. And it deleted it. Let's refresh the page to make sure it's really, really gone. Now let's delete futures written in code. And that's deleted. Let's also go back and show that, because let's see, I put everything on test. Let's put some on test 2. On test 2. This way we know they're going to the right place. So now we have it on test 2. We go back home. We view details on test 1, and they have theirs. And so I think that's where I'm going to wrap it now. So the kind of highlights are Prisma, pretty cool, easy to set up something with SQLite. The other thing that's interesting is to show how you can handle multiple forms on the same page with one action. With one action method. And what I'm doing to track it is just looking at the type of method it is. The other thing you do, if multiple methods are passed in, you could pass additional data on the form object, which lets you know which action needs to be taken. And maybe I'll show another way that you can do this with that approach, because the thing to realize are that these buttons are form entries also, so you can pass values on the buttons too. And I think what I was reading, the way they did it was, actually I don't remember how they did it. But I'll take a look at that video again and show you how another way to approach. But the way that I approach it, I'm just tracking the method on the submit. And for the delete, I know I want to delete. And for the regular post, I know I want to add the bookmark. So I'm going to stop it there. because I don't want these videos to be too long. I'll post all the source code. I'll post a project. Please feel free to leave any comments below. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and thanks for watching the video.